The moment I found out I was excluded from the family group chat, I felt a familiar stab of hurt. It was another reminder of how my mother, Susan, had always favored my brother, Mark. They shared inside jokes, plans, and memories, while I was left out in the cold. The ping of my phone brought a wave of anxiety as I scrolled through the chat and saw their laughter, their connection, and my absence. I had worked hard to keep the family together, but the cost was too high. This year's family gathering felt like the perfect opportunity to confront them about the years of exclusion. I had a deadline, the gathering was in 2 days, and I was determined to make my voice heard. Growing up, I was always the one who made sacrifices for my family. I was the reliable one, helping with chores, babysitting, and even financially supporting my parents during tough times. Meanwhile, Mark received the accolades and love that I yearned for. The unspoken rule in our family was clear. Mark was the favorite, and I was the afterthought. I can still recall my mother's pride when he graduated, her joy when he got his first job, while I sat in silence applauding from the sidelines. The emotional toll was exhausting, and with every family event, it became increasingly apparent that my needs were secondary. This gathering would amplify the cost of my loyalty, as I braced myself for more of the same. I thought about all the times I had gone out of my way to please them, to keep the peace, only to be met with indifference. I had put my dreams on hold, sacrificed my happiness, and yet the more I gave, the more they took. It was suffocating. I realized that I had been living in their shadow for far too long. I was tired of being the one who kept trying to fit into a family that didn't value me. With each passing day, the hurt was carving deeper wounds, and I knew I couldn't let it continue. This time I would stand up for myself. I would no longer be the invisible sister. I would demand to be seen. Growing up, I was always the one who made sacrifices for my family. I was the reliable one, helping with chores, babysitting, and even financially supporting my parents during tough times. I remember the countless weekends spent cleaning the house or running errands, all while my brother Mark was off doing whatever he pleased, basking in my parents' praise. It felt like I was invisible, like my efforts were taken for granted. Mark received the accolades and love that I yearned for. The unspoken rule in our family was clear. Mark was the favorite, and I was the afterthought. I can still recall my mother's pride when he graduated, her joy when he got his first job, while I sat in silence applauding from the sidelines. I did everything right, yet somehow it was never enough. I would do my best, but it always felt like I was jumping through hoops just to gain a fraction of the recognition he got effortlessly. I remember one Christmas when I had spent weeks planning a surprise party for my parents. I had coordinated with relatives, bought decorations, and even prepared a meal. I was so excited to see their faces when they walked in. But when they arrived, all they could talk about was how Mark had just gotten a promotion at work. I felt my heart sink as I stood there, holding a tray of cookies, while my efforts faded into the background. The emotional toll was exhausting. With every family event, it became increasingly apparent that my needs were secondary. I would sit there, smiling, nodding, and pretending I was happy for everyone else, while inside I felt hollow. It was like I was a ghost in my own family. They would joke about how I was always there to help, never realizing how much it hurt to be seen only as a resource. The more I gave, the more they took. I was suffocating under the weight of their expectations and my own desire to belong. Every time I'd muster the courage to express my feelings, I was met with disbelief or outright dismissal. "You're being too sensitive, Emily," they would say with a wave of their hand. It was as if my pain was just a figment of my imagination, and I was the one to blame for feeling left out. How could they not see how much I was hurting? How could they not understand that their favoritism was tearing me apart? I can still remember the last family event I attended before this gathering. I had tried to joke with them, but the laughter felt forced, like I was trying to fit into a mold that no longer existed. I had put my dreams on hold, sacrificed my happiness, and yet the more I gave, the more they took. I was tired of being the one who kept trying to fit into a family that didn't value me. I thought about all the times I had gone out of my way to please them, only to be met with indifference. I was the one who would drop everything to help them, whether it was a last-minute favor or an emotional crisis. I was always there, ready to lend a hand or a listening ear. But when it came time for me to ask for help, I was met with excuses or outright silence. I felt like a doormat and I was sick of it. With each passing day, the hurt was carving deeper wounds, and I knew I couldn't let it continue. I was tired of being the invisible sister. I would demand to be seen. I had stayed silent for too long, convincing myself that if I just tried harder, things would change. But now I realized that they wouldn't. This time I would stand up for myself. I started thinking about the gathering. It was my chance to confront them. I wanted to tell them how their actions made me feel, how their favoritism had affected my life. I wanted them to understand that I was not just a supporting character in their story, but a person with feelings and needs of my own. I could no longer pretend to be okay with their dynamic. It was time for me to reclaim my voice. As I scrolled through my phone, I stumbled upon a screenshot of the family group chat, buzzing with laughter and inside jokes about my absence. They had even made fun of my recent struggles at work, poking fun at my tight deadlines and the challenges I faced with the difficult project. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, the betrayal sinking deep into my chest. It was a stark reminder that I was merely a tool for their convenience. Someone to lean on when they needed help but never someone who belonged. This wasn't the first time I had felt like an outsider in my own family, but it felt like the last straw. I knew then that I could no longer be silent. There wouldn't be a conversation. I would take a stand. The realization hit me hard. I had dedicated so much of my life to them, always being the one to support or uplift, yet they never seemed to notice. I thought of all the sacrifices I had made, all the times I had put my needs aside for their whims. They had grown accustomed to my unwavering support, but I was tired of being the dependable daughter who never received any appreciation in return. I was sick of being the family's emotional punching bag, there to absorb their problems while mine were brushed aside. I had worked hard, and instead of recognition I got ridicule. I could still hear the snickers echoing in my mind as I read those messages. The sharpness of their words stung, each joke a reminder of the chasm that had grown between us. I had always been the one to hold the family together, the glue that kept everyone from falling apart. But all that had done was place me in a position of servitude, where I was expected to be grateful for the scraps of love they occasionally tossed my way. Well, I was done. Done with the jokes, done with being the butt of their humor, and done with the constant feeling of inadequacy. The anger bubbled inside me, but it wasn't just anger. It was a mixture of rage and sadness, like a storm brewing within. I had spent far too many years trying to fit into their mold, trying to earn my place at the table while they laughed at my expense. I thought about how many times I had consoled them, only to be dismissed when I needed a listening ear. It was infuriating. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal and humiliation. It was time for me to stand up for myself, to reclaim my worth. I thought of the family gathering just 2 days away, and how this was my chance to expose their behavior. I was ready to confront them about the years of exclusion, to let them know that I was done being sidelined. I would no longer sit in silence while they made me the invisible sister, the one who was only called upon when they needed something. This time I would demand to be seen, to be acknowledged for who I was, not for what I could do for them. As I prepared for the confrontation, I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. Part of me was terrified of their reactions. What if they lashed out? But another part of me was excited at the thought of finally standing my ground. I wasn't going to be the quiet Emily anymore. I was going to voice my hurt, my confusion, and my anger. I wanted them to understand the impact of their actions, how their favoritism had affected my life, my choices, and my self-esteem. I needed them to know that I was a person, not just a backup plan. I spent hours drafting what I wanted to say, rehearsing my words in front of the mirror. I wanted to ensure I was clear and articulate, that I could convey my emotions without breaking down. I couldn't afford to show weakness. I had to be strong. I was tired of being the one who cried in the corner while they basked in their own glory. I wanted them to hear me, to see me for once. Finally, the day of the gathering arrived. As I stood in front of the mirror, I took a deep breath and reminded myself of my worth. I was not just Emily, the sister who did everything right while being ignored. I was capable, strong, and ready to fight for my place in this family. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. I grabbed my purse, stealing my resolve, and headed out the door. This time I would make my voice heard. At the family gathering, my heart raced as I walked into the living room filled with laughter and cheer. The familiar scent of my mother's cooking wafted through the air, but it only served to tighten the knot in my stomach. I knew this was the moment I had been preparing for, The moment I would confront my mother and Mark about their treatment of me. I took a deep breath and steeled myself. I had rehearsed this in my mind 100 times, and now it was time to let my voice be heard. "Hey everyone, can I have your attention for a moment?" I called out, my voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. Conversations faded and eyes turned toward me, curiosity mixed with surprise. I could see Mark raise an eyebrow, while Susan's smile faltered just a touch. It was now or never. I know about the group chat. I started, my heart pounding. I saw the messages, the jokes about my absence, and the comments about my work struggles. I want you both to know that I'm done trying to fit into your expectations. If you want me in your lives, it needs to be genuine without the sarcasm and the mockery. No more jokes at my expense. The words poured out of me, fueled by a mix of anger and determination. The room fell silent, and I could feel the weight of my statement hanging in the air. I locked eyes with my mother, who looked taken aback, and Mark, who was visibly uncomfortable. Susan's expression shifted from surprise to defensiveness, and I could see her trying to formulate a response. "Oh come on, Emily, it was just a joke," Susan exclaimed, waving her hand dismissively. "You know we didn't mean anything by it. It was all in good fun." Her voice dripped with that familiar tone, the one that always seemed to brush aside my feelings. I held my ground, refusing to let her brush me off this time. "No, Mom, it wasn't just a joke. It hurt. And I'm tired of being the one who gets left out while you both share your inside jokes and memories. I've spent my entire life trying to keep this family together, and in return I feel like I'm invisible. If this continues, I'll walk away for good." I could see the shock on their faces, their disbelief evident. Mark's eyes widened, and I could sense the tension in the room thickening. "You're being dramatic, Emily," Mark said, attempting to downplay my feelings. "It's not that serious. You're making a big deal out of nothing." His dismissive tone sent a surge of frustration through me. How could he not see how damaging their favoritism had been? I took a breath, feeling the weight of my words. "No, Mark, it is serious. You both have taken my support for granted for too long. And I'm done. I deserve better than to be the punchline of your jokes, or the one who is only called when you need something. I won't allow it anymore." The silence that followed was palpable. I could see the other family members exchanging glances, clearly taken aback by the confrontation. Some looked uncomfortable, while others appeared to be processing the truth of my words. Susan attempted to regain control of the room, but her tone was different now, laced with anger. "You're acting like a spoiled child, Emily. You think we don't care about you?" Her voice was raised, and I could see her frustration boiling over. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had finally said what I needed to say, and while it was clear they were furious, I also felt empowered. For the first time in years, I was standing up for myself, demanding respect that I had long been denied. "It's not about not caring, Mom. It's about how you show that care. And right now it feels like you only love me when it's convenient for you. I'm tired of being the reliable one, the one who cleans up the messes. I want to be treated as a part of this family, not just a backup plan." My voice was firm, and I could feel the tears threatening to spill, but I held them back. I wouldn't let them see me cry. If you want me in your lives, it has to be real. I won't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. I deserve to be valued, to be seen and heard just like Mark. I'm done with the silence. As I spoke, I felt a sense of liberation. The weight of years of hurt and neglect was finally being lifted off my shoulders. I could see the effects of my words on my mother and brother, the shock transforming into anger. But I wouldn't back down. I stood tall, ready for whatever would come next. As the evening went on, Susan and Mark attempted to manipulate me into staying the same old Emily. "Come on, don't be dramatic," Mark said dismissively, his tone dripping with that familiar condescension I had grown to loathe. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. It was just a joke." My heart raced at his words, and the guilt started creeping in, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. They wanted me to believe that my boundaries were selfish, that I was the one in the wrong for wanting to be treated with respect. Susan chimed in, her voice heavy with faux concern. "You wouldn't abandon us now, would you? We're family, Emily. We love you." But their words felt hollow, echoing in my mind like a well-rehearsed script. Love shouldn't come with strings attached, and I could see right through their attempts to pull at my heartstrings. They weren't worried about my feelings. They were worried about losing the emotional and practical support I provided. I felt a familiar pang of guilt rising within me, the kind that had kept me tethered to this toxic dynamic for far too long. They wanted me to feel like the villain for wanting to be treated fairly, for wanting to stand up for myself. I could see their eyes flicker with frustration as they tried to twist the narrative, making it about me being unreasonable, rather than addressing the real issue at hand. I knew this was a tactic, a way to divert attention from their behavior and place the blame squarely on my shoulders. But deep down I was aware that I had every right to set boundaries. I had spent years bending over backward to accommodate their needs, sacrificing my own feelings and desires in the process. The emotional toll was exhausting, and I was not going to let them manipulate me into feeling guilty for wanting to be treated with respect. "I'm not abandoning anyone," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. "I'm simply choosing to prioritize my well-being for once. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be built on mutual respect and understanding, not mockery and exclusion. I refuse to be your emotional punching bag any longer." The tension in the air was palpable, thick with unspoken words and heavy with the reality of what I was saying. I could see the disbelief in their eyes, the way Susan's expression shifted from angry to shocked as she processed my refusal to back down. Mark, too, looked taken aback, as if he couldn't believe I was standing my ground. "You're being unreasonable, Emily," Mark snapped, his voice rising. "You're acting like we've done something terrible to you. It's not a big deal. You're just overreacting." I could see the anger boiling beneath the surface, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of fear. Would they lash out? Would they turn on me completely? But I couldn't let that fear control me any longer. "It is a big deal to me," I shot back, my voice unwavering. "You may not see it as such, but the years of feeling overlooked and unappreciated have taken a toll. I'm tired of being the one who sacrifices everything just to keep the peace. I'm not overreacting. I'm finally standing up for myself." The silence that followed felt like a weight pressing down on me, but I stood firm. I could see the wheels turning in their heads, the anger morphing into something darker as they struggled to regain control of the narrative. Susan opened her mouth, ready to say something, but I cut her off. "I refuse to be part of this toxic dynamic any longer. If you can't treat me with the same love and respect you give Mark, then I won't be here. I deserve more than being the invisible sister, who is only valued when it's convenient for you." I could see the shock and anger flash across their faces. Susan's eyes narrowed, and her lips pressed into a tight line. Mark looked like he was about to explode, his fists clenching at his sides. The other family members shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught off guard by the confrontation. I had finally voiced the truth that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Their response was predictable. Instead of reflecting on their actions, they lashed out. "You're such an ungrateful daughter," Susan yelled, her voice breaking the tense silence. "This is all your fault. If you hadn't made such a big deal out of nothing, we wouldn't be in this situation." Her words stung, but I refused to let them break me. I could see the anger in her eyes, the denial that came so easily to her. Mark joined in, blaming me for ruining the gathering. "You've always been overdramatic, Emily. Why do you have to make everything about you?" I felt a strange satisfaction knowing that the truth was finally out. They weren't just angry at me. They were furious that I had exposed their dysfunction in front of others. I had shattered their illusion of a perfect family, and for that they were retaliating. But I stood firm, knowing that I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was tearing down the walls of a toxic dynamic that had suffocated me for far too long. The gathering was in full swing when Susan orchestrated a situation where I would have to step in. It was no accident. I knew her well enough by now to see the manipulation at play. She pretended to misplace an important family heirloom, making it clear that I was expected to take charge and fix the mess. I could already see the glances exchanged between her and Mark, their eyes sparkling with that familiar sense of expectation. They wanted me to jump in and play the role of the helper as I always had. My heart raced as I felt the pressure mount. Would I fold under their expectations once again? As the family members buzzed around, I felt the weight of their eyes on me, silently urging me to take action. The heirloom was a family ring, something that had been passed down for generations. It was supposed to symbolize unity and love, But all it felt like now was another way for them to pull me back into their web of dysfunction. Susan's voice rang out, feigning concern. Oh no, where could it be? Emily, can you help me find it? You always know how to fix things. I glanced around the room, watching as a few relatives began to murmur, clearly waiting for me to step in. My instincts kicked in, and I felt that familiar urge to rescue them, to be the one they relied on to make everything better. But this time I paused. Instead of rushing to solve the problem, I took a deep breath and chose to do nothing. I stood back and watched as the chaos unfolded. The murmurs grew louder, and I could see Susan's facade beginning to crack. She was panicking, her calm demeanor slipping away as she searched frantically through drawers and under cushions. Mark stood there, looking uncomfortable but also expecting me to jump in and save the day. I could see the frustration building in their expressions as they realized I wasn't going to play my usual role. As I stood there, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. I was no longer the one who had to fix everything. I had made my choice, and I wasn't going to let them manipulate me into taking on that burden again. I could feel the tension in the air as relatives began to exchange glances, some of them clearly uncomfortable with the unfolding situation. The silence was louder than any scream. I could see my mother's irritation boiling over, her frustration bubbling out in sharp comments aimed at my inaction. Emily, why aren't you helping? She snapped, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Her eyes darted around, searching for someone to blame. And I could see the realization dawning on her that I was no longer her reliable backup. I chose not to respond immediately, letting the chaos continue to swirl around me. It was liberating to watch her struggle, to see how she was floundering without my support. The more she searched, the more desperate she became. I could feel the weight of the years I had spent cleaning up her messes lifting off my shoulders. I had spent so long feeling responsible for their happiness, and now I was finally free to let them face the consequences of their actions. Eventually, as the tension reached a tipping point, Susan turned to me, her expression a mix of anger and confusion. This isn't funny, Emily. You need to help me find it. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the noise of the gathering. I could see Mark standing beside her, looking equally frustrated, his arms crossed tightly against his chest. I finally met her gaze, my expression calm and steady. I'm not going to help you, Mom. You need to figure this out on your own. I'm tired of being the one who fixes everything for you. It's time for you to take responsibility for your own messes. The shock on her face was palpable, and for a moment the room fell silent. I could see the disbelief in the eyes of the other family members as they processed what I had just said. Some looked uncomfortable, while others seemed to nod in understanding. In that moment I felt liberated. I hadn't lost anything by distancing myself. I had freed myself from a heavy burden. As Susan's frustration turned to anger, I watched her struggle to regain control of the situation. She began to lash out at the other family members, blaming them for not helping her. But I stood firm, knowing that I had finally taken a stand. I wasn't going to be dragged back into their chaos. I was ready to embrace my own life, free from the toxic patterns that had held me captive for so long. Instead of rushing to solve the problem, I took a deep breath and chose to do nothing. I watched as chaos unfolded. Relatives began to murmur, and Susan's facade crumbled. I didn't offer assistance or even a comforting word. I had made my choice. I felt a strange sense of peace as I watched my mother and brother flounder, realizing they could no longer rely on me to fix everything. The silence was louder than any scream. As I stood there, arms crossed, I felt a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Part of me wanted to jump in, to restore order and ease the discomfort that was spreading through the room. But I knew that would only reinforce the old dynamic. I had spent years being the one to clean up their messes, to soothe their anxieties, and I was done. I was tired of being the family's emotional crutch, their problem solver, and their backup plan. The atmosphere thickened with uncertainty. I observed as Susan's cool composure began to crack under the pressure. Her perfect image was shattering, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. For once, she was the one in distress, and I wasn't there to rescue her. I silently watched as she rummaged through the drawers and cushions, her frustration mounting with each passing second. Mark stood by, visibly uncomfortable, but he too was caught in the web of expectation. He had always relied on my support, and now he was left to navigate the chaos without me. I could hear whispers among the relatives. Some were clearly unsure about what to do, caught between loyalty to Susan and their growing awareness of how I had been treated. I caught a few nods, a few sympathetic glances, and it felt empowering. For so long my voice had been silenced, overshadowed by the loud dynamics of my family. But now they were witnessing the truth unfold right before their eyes. Susan's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp and accusing. "Emily, why are you just standing there? Help me." There was panic in her tone, and I reveled in the moment. She was used to having me at her beck and call, and now the tables had turned. I felt empowered by my decision to not engage, to let her sit in the mess she had created. Mark, still standing next to her, tried to interject, his face a mix of irritation and disbelief. "Come on, this is ridiculous. Just help us find it." His words dripped with that familiar condescension I had grown to loathe. I could see the irritation in his eyes, but it didn't faze me. I had become a stranger to their expectations, and that felt liberating. I took a step back, letting the chaos unfold. I watched as Susan's frustration turned to anger, and I could feel the tension in the room shift. She was losing control, and it was beautiful to witness. The more she panicked, the more I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't responsible for her emotions anymore. As relatives began to murmur among themselves, I caught snippets of their conversations. "I didn't realize Emily did so much for them," one distant relative said. Another chimed in, "It's about time she stood up for herself." Their words were empowering, a testament to the truth I had been afraid to voice for so long. I felt a strange sense of peace as I stood there, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold. I was no longer tethered to their expectations or their needs. I had made my choice, and now they were forced to face the consequences of their actions without me. I could see Susan's composure slipping further away, her frustration boiling over as she began to lash out at the other family members. "Why isn't anyone helping me?" she snapped, her voice rising with anger. I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing I had reclaimed my power. I was no longer the invisible sister who was only valued when it was convenient. I was standing my ground, and for the first time I felt a surge of confidence. I didn't need their approval or their love. I was finally free to be myself, unencumbered by their toxic dynamics. As the moments stretched on, I watched the family dynamics shift. The others were beginning to realize that I was no longer the one to fix everything. Susan's panic was palpable, and I could see her desperation to regain control. She began to turn on the other relatives, accusing them of not helping and blaming them for the situation. I could see the disbelief in their eyes. They were witnessing her true colors. And then it hit me. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The mask had slipped, and the truth was finally being exposed. I didn't just feel free. I felt empowered. I was no longer a backup plan or an afterthought. I was standing up for myself, and I wasn't going to let anyone drag me back into their chaos. As I stood there, I felt a rush of emotions, relief, pride, and even joy. I had finally taken a stand, and although the road ahead was uncertain, I knew one thing for sure. I was never going back. The weight of years of hurt was finally lifting, and with it came a new sense of freedom. I was ready to embrace my life, filled with genuine relationships and free from the toxicity of my past. I didn't need to fix their problems anymore. I could finally focus on my own life, my own happiness, and that felt like the greatest victory of all. As the evening spiraled into discomfort, Susan lashed out. "You're such an ungrateful daughter. This is all your fault," she yelled, her face flushed with anger. Mark chimed in, blaming me for ruining the gathering. "You've always been overdramatic, Emily. Why do you have to make everything about you?" Their words stung, and I could see the disdain etched in their expressions. But beneath the hurt, I felt a strange satisfaction knowing that the truth was finally out. They weren't just angry at me. They were furious that I had exposed their dysfunction in front of others. The silence in the room was deafening. I could feel the weight of their accusations, but I refused to let them break me. I had spent years being the scapegoat, absorbing their anger and guilt without ever voicing my own feelings. But now I stood tall, unwavering in my resolve. I looked around and noticed some relatives shifting uncomfortably, their expressions betraying a mix of shock and understanding. They had witnessed the way I had been treated, and I could see their eyes reflecting a new awareness of the dynamic at play. Susan's anger only seemed to amplify as she fumed, trying to regain the upper hand. I can't believe you would do this to your family. You're making a scene for no reason. You think you're the victim here, but you're not. Her tone dripped with venom, and I could see her struggling to maintain control. It was almost comical to watch her desperately trying to spin the narrative back in her favor. I took a moment to breathe, letting her words wash over me without sinking in. No longer was I the emotional punching bag. I had found my voice and I wasn't afraid to use it. This isn't about being a victim, Mom. It's about recognizing the truth. You and Mark have made it clear that I'm not valued in this family unless it's convenient for you. I'm tired of being the one who sacrifices everything just to keep the peace. It's time for you to hear what I've been saying all along. Mark tried to interject, his frustration bubbling over. You're just being dramatic. You're ruining a family gathering over a text chat. I could see his face reddening, the anger boiling over as he struggled to maintain his composure. But I remained firm, unyielding in my stance. You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about a chat or a gathering. It's about the years of feeling overlooked and unappreciated. It's about the countless times I've been there for you, only to be treated like I don't matter. This is my moment to stand up for myself. And I refuse to let you belittle my feelings any longer. The room was still, the tension palpable. I could see the shock on my family's faces as they processed my words. For the first time, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. I was breaking free from their narrative and it felt incredible. Susan's anger morphed into denial, her face contorting as she tried to deflect the blame. You're making this all about you. Why can't you just be happy for your brother? I let out a short, humorless laugh. Happy for Mark? Happy for being the forgotten sister? You don't understand, do you? I've spent years being the one to hold this family together, while you two have basked in your own little world of favoritism. I'm not going to play that role anymore. If you can't treat me with the same love and respect you give Mark, then I won't be here. I deserve so much more than being the invisible sister, who is only valued when it's convenient for you. As I finished speaking, I noticed several family members exchanging glances, their expressions shifting from shock to contemplation. I could see that my words were resonating, that the facade they had built was starting to crumble. Susan was losing her grip, her attempts to regain control slipping away with every passing second. Mark looked visibly uncomfortable, his bravado faltering as he realized he was losing the battle. I could see the realization dawning on him that I was no longer the easy target he could manipulate. You're going to regret this, Emily. Susan spat, her voice dripping with venom. You think you can just walk away from your family? You're making a mistake. I shook my head, feeling a calm wash over me. No, Mom. I'm finally making the right decision. I'm not walking away. I'm choosing to prioritize my own happiness instead of trying to fit into a family that doesn't appreciate me. I deserve better than this. Their anger was palpable, but I stood my ground, refusing to let their toxicity seep into my newfound strength. I could see the cracks in their carefully constructed image, the facade they had maintained for so long beginning to crumble as they grappled with the reality of my words. Their reaction only solidified my resolve. I was breaking free from their chaos, and nothing could pull me back into their world of dysfunction. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere shifted. The other relatives were beginning to realize that I was no longer the one who would fix everything. Susan and Mark were left floundering, their anger boiling over into desperate attempts to regain control. But I knew I had the upper hand, and I felt empowered in that knowledge. I had finally shattered the illusion of a perfect family, and I wouldn't allow them to drag me back into their toxic dynamic. I was ready to embrace my life, my choices, and my happiness, free from the burden of their expectations. I had found my voice, and I wasn't going to let it be silenced again. As the night progressed, it became evident that Mark couldn't handle the situation without my help. He stumbled over his words and struggled to keep the conversation flowing. The family's discomfort was palpable, and I could hear whispers of disbelief about how he had always relied on me. A distant relative looked at me and said, "Wow, I didn't realize how much you did for them." In that moment I felt liberated. I hadn't lost anything by distancing myself. I had freed myself from a heavy burden. Mark was visibly uncomfortable, and it was almost amusing to see the tables turned. For years I had been the one to support him, to prop up his ego and help him shine in front of our parents. But now, without my presence to smooth over the awkwardness, he floundered. It was as if the family dynamic was a carefully balanced house of cards, and my decision to step back had sent it tumbling down. I watched as he tried to regain the narrative, but with every attempt, it slipped further from his grasp. Can we just focus on finding the heirloom? He stuttered, his frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. The confidence he usually exuded was replaced by uncertainty. I could see him glancing nervously at Susan, who was struggling to maintain her composure. She was used to having me clean up their messes, and without me she was losing control of the situation. The murmurs in the room grew louder, and I could feel the shift. Some relatives were beginning to see through the smoke and mirrors that my mother and brother had built around their perfect family image. I caught snippets of their conversations. I had no idea Emily was always there for them, one said. She deserves so much more, another chimed in. It felt surreal to hear their recognition of the truth, the validation I had yearned for all my life. As I stood there, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold, I couldn't ignore the rush of emotions surging through me. I felt relief, pride, and even a twinge of joy. I had finally found my voice, and it was beautiful to witness the impact it was having on those around me. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer the background character in my own life. I was the lead, and I was ready to embrace this new role. Susan's frustration was growing, and I could see the desperation in her eyes. "Mark, help me. Why are you just standing there?" she snapped, her voice laced with anger. It was as if she couldn't comprehend that her tactics were failing. She had always relied on me to be the mediator, the one who kept the peace. But that role was no longer mine to fill. Mark looked at me, his expression a mix of disbelief and irritation. "You're ruining everything, Emily. Just help us find it." His voice was rising, and I could feel the tension thickening in the air. But I stood firm, unwilling to be manipulated back into my old role. "No, I'm not going to help you. You need to figure this out on your own. I'm tired of being the one who fixes everything for you. It's time for you to take responsibility for your own messes," I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. The silence in the room was deafening. I could see Mark's face turn red with anger, but I didn't flinch. I was finally breaking free from their grasp, and it felt empowering. The truth was being laid bare, and I realized I was no longer afraid of their reactions. I took a moment to breathe, letting the weight of the situation settle around me. The other family members were shifting uncomfortably, some nodding in agreement with my words. It was a sight I had longed for. The realization that I was not alone in this struggle. My voice was finally being heard, and it was a liberating feeling. Susan's composure was slipping further as she lashed out at the family members, blaming them for not helping her. "You're all useless. Why isn't anyone helping me?" she shouted, her frustration boiling over. I watched as her facade crumbled, the cracks widening with each accusation. The relatives were witnessing her true colors, and I could see their discomfort as they began to realize what I had endured for so long. Susan had always been the matriarch, the one who held the family together with her iron grip, but now that grip was slipping, and I reveled in the moment. Mark tried to rally the family, attempting to shift the blame back to me. "Emily just wants attention. She's always been like this," he exclaimed, but his words fell flat. The family members were no longer buying into the narrative he had been selling for years. I could see the discomfort on their faces, and it felt like a victory. Finally, they were seeing the truth. I stood my ground, watching as the family dynamic unraveled before my eyes. Susan's anger was palpable, but I could feel the weight of their expectations lifting off my shoulders. I was free from the cycle of dysfunction. As the room filled with whispers and uncertainty, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. I wasn't just standing up for myself. I was reclaiming my life. I was no longer the one who would be there to clean up their messes. I was stepping into my own power, and it felt exhilarating. The realization washed over me. I had finally broken the cycle. No longer would I be the scapegoat or the emotional crutch. I was ready to embrace my own happiness, my own life, and I felt a surge of hope for the future. I was standing in my truth, and nothing could pull me back into their toxic world. I left the gathering that night with a light heart. I realized that I no longer needed their approval or love. My life was mine to live, and I could find peace away from their toxicity. I chose to focus on building my own life, filled with genuine relationships. If they called, I wouldn't answer. If they texted, I wouldn't respond. Their voices no longer held power over me. I was finally free, and that freedom felt like home. The next morning, I woke up and felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat in my favorite chair, soaking in the quiet. I took out a notebook and began to jot down my goals. Things I wanted to do, places I wanted to visit, and dreams I wanted to pursue. I felt a surge of excitement as I wrote, each word reinforcing my commitment to myself. I thought about traveling to that beach I had always wanted to visit, the one I had put off for summer family trips that never seemed to happen. I also considered enrolling in that art class I had always been curious about. It was time for me to invest in myself and my happiness, rather than pouring my energy into a family that didn't recognize my worth. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself smiling more. I took long walks in the park, met new friends, and reconnected with old ones. I felt lighter, more vibrant, and ready to embrace the life I desired. I realized that the weight of my family's expectations had been lifted off my shoulders, and I was finally free to live for myself. I had come to understand that peace was not just a state of mind, it was a choice. I chose to surround myself with people who valued me, who appreciated my efforts, and who made me feel seen. I was no longer willing to settle for a love that came with strings attached. My heart was open to the possibilities that lay ahead, and I felt excited about